Hello everyone, welcome back to Life of Us. Good day, good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're at, and welcome back to my blog. As you all know, I am a huge fan of the D&D Adventure Board Games, and today's segment is going to be a little different to my normal standard fare. Normally there'd be a presentation up and I'd be presenting some or other custom build. I am pleased to say that I am done building custom heroes for the D&D Adventure Board Games. But we still have to do some villains, and that will be coming up shortly. But in today's segment, I thought I'd do a little different spin for today. And today is going to be all about my favorite pastime, which is the D&D Adventure Board Game series. As you know, I'm an avid board gamer, group and solo board gamer. And the D&D board games have come and sort of become the de facto gaming system for most of our group and some of my solo board gaming experiences. And I thought in today's segment I would do a ranking of my favorite board game pastime, which is the D&D Adventure Board Game systems, and do a ranking of them. I currently have 5 of them, as you can see over here. I don't own one of them, which is the Temple of Elemental Evil. I haven't been able to quite get my hands on that just yet, but hopefully soon. It's not the latest version that there is, I just haven't been able to get hold of it. At the time when it was on special, I had my budget invested elsewhere in the Hellboy board game, which I have sitting at the bottom. Also a really great game, but today is all about the D&D Adventure Board Game systems, and we are going to rank them in order of my least, well, I can't say least favorite because they're all fantastic, but in descending order of rank up to my favorite one. So let's step right into that then, shall we? So my number 5 on my list is the Tomb of Annihilation, a fairly newish game to the series, not the latest one, but it was a release from WizKids. The previous ones prior to this were all Wizards of the Coast, I think. I might be wrong about Temple of Elemental Evil. I think that was a WizKids Wizard of the Coast type collaboration thing. I was a bit late in getting to Tomb of Annihilation. I did my first unboxing in 2018, I think it was, but my actual playthrough only came in at around last year, 2019, so a bit late with actually getting to the actual playthrough of the game. And it is a fantastic and refreshing take on the D&D Adventure Board Games. In this case, instead of the usual dungeon crawler, the Tomb of Annihilation took you down into the land of Chult, and the mysterious death curse that was plaguing the land of Chult. Very campaign driven, storyline driven. Eventually you descend into the Tomb of the Nine Gods to face up against Asirak, the titular villain of the Tomb of Horrors series, which actually was what piqued my interest in D&D in the my very first experience with it, which was 3ED, 3rd edition I think it was, with the Tomb of Horrors. That's when I met Asirak first time by browsing through a comic book and coming across this crazy villain who for some reason still today reminds me of the Moram character from the Temple of Doom series. I still picture him having an Indian accent, believe it or not. And I was quite eager to go and plow through the game and battle Asirak and defeat him, the Archlich, the Demi-Lich, the famous Lich in D&D. He's the embodiment of D&D for me, was always Asirak, apart from the dragons and the usual fare. This time around it took you into the jungles of Chult, and the card tiles were fantastic compared to what I'd seen before. I mean, the detail on here was really good. The jungle-like setting also works quite well, and the adventures also okay-ish, but I had a couple of issues with the game itself after playing through it. My biggest gripe, I suppose, with it is the fact that there's a bit of unbalancing with the heroes and the leveling up of the heroes. The later versions after this, which is the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, actually took that a little further and has your heroes level up to level 3 and 4. And I've done the same with the custom builds I've done, allowing heroes to level up to level 3 and 4. But I did find it slightly unbalanced in favor of the heroes. By the time you get to the second level of your character and you've manage to acquire a few items as well as advancement tokens, then the challenge kind of falls away. It wasn't as challenging. I like my games very challenging, or a little bit more towards the more challenging side as opposed to easy peasy. So happy to die a few times in the game because it just helps you to rethink your strategy and plan things for the next time you play it. But believe it or not, playing through the entire campaign, I only used one healing surge, two healing surges to be honest. One was the healing surge which I acquired through winning an adventure, which was the Nanny Poo Poo's healing surge, which I used up, and then the other one was the actual healing surge. And those were two different adventures that I used them up. But not really feeling completely threatened or challenged throughout this game at any point. I did play with a few of the heroes, but the Ranger hero Artus Kimber wasn't really ever threatened, and when eventually we did descend into the Tomb of the Nine Gods to battle the Archlich Sidorak and all of his foes, which are memorable. They are memorable foes and they've got some really cool stats, but it just didn't feel a challenge for me. So my second playthrough of the game, I played through the Tomb of the Nine Gods part, not the full campaign. I did change it up a little bit, setting the maximum number of items and advancement tokens that a character could have, as well as changing up the 8th name tile to the 10th name tile, because that's how these games play out. You've got to find a particular tile in the dungeon tile stack. It's randomly placed between the 8th and the 12th tile in the stack. I just moved it down to the 10th, so you had a bit more of a challenge in terms of duration, as well as not being able to draw treasures once you descended into the Tomb of the Nine Gods, or be able to cancel encounters twice in a row. So those were the type of house rule variants that I included to add a bit more challenge, and you could probably do the same. But it does include some really impressive looking villains, like this giant stone juggernaut, and it's so imposing. But your heroes get so powered up to that level that when eventually you do face off against this thing, it's just not much of a challenge. I wanted more of a gauntlet type of challenge where you're trying to escape this thing in a labyrinth type of environment, and maybe I'll build a custom adventure just for this thing, the Stone Juggernaut. But all in all, Tomb of Annihilation is a great game. If you do house rule a little bit to add a bit more variance and a bit more challenge, it does include some. You can see the difference in this version of the game that compared to other versions. Full color adventure booklet and full color rules booklet as well. The dungeon tiles or the jungle tiles are really fantastic. The card stock and quality is great, despite my initial gripes with the minis. WizKids did replace my mini eventually, so thank you WizKids for that. But yeah, Tomb of Annihilation is at number 5. Still a great game. I'd still definitely want to play the jungle version and do some custom campaigns for it in a bigger setting. And that's my number 5 for the D&D Adventure Board Games. Let's have a look and see what's next up in line. My number 4 is The Wrath of Shadowline. Now don't get me wrong, Shadowline is still one of my go-to games of most of these games. It is the game that has seen the most customization for our group play, where we've done custom adventures just off the bat of the game itself. It's a fantastic game. It also introduced a campaign style mechanic. It's also a Wizard of the Coast game, before they switched over to WizKids with Temple of Elemental Evil and onwards. And the last one, I think it was from Wizards of the Coast. And it is a fantastic game on its own. It's got some amazing components, as well as the campaign style narrative and the introduction of these chamber tiles, which spawns the sort of end of game epic boss battle where you spawn a bunch of monsters as well as a boss villain, and you go and have to defeat it. That said, the actual out of the box game plays okay. It's got some cool adventures, but it has a very sort of repetitive rinse and repeat style campaign thing going for it. It's always find the start of the dire tile stack or the horrid chamber tile stack, and once you do draw a card to see which villain you are defeating, whether it's orcs or Durga guards or aberrants. Defeat them, defeat the boss monster, and carry on. So it's still one of my favorite games. I just wish there was a little bit more variance with the campaign narrative, but we've house ruled and we've done our own homebrew version of these campaigns, from epic pre-built dungeons to really long explorations trying to defeat a Shadowline, and still a fantastic game. This is the artwork for the adventure, for the rulebook, and it has some pretty cool components inside of it, including, of course, the famous Otyugh, which I think was the villain in third series of the Stranger Things series, as well as a Shadowline, the Red Dragon himself. So some fantastic components, some excellent gameplay. It's a proper dungeon crawl. You're descending into Firestorm Peak to battle a Shadowline and defeat a Shadowline. Also had some really cool heroes and some of the best treasures out of all of the games. I would say that this game has probably got the best treasures out of all of the Wizards of the Coast games, which was Castle Ravenloft, Legend of Drizzt, and Wrath of a Shadowline. Shadowline's got the best items in treasures out of all of them. So some fantastic gameplay. Still a great game to play for new players to get on board. If you want to pick up a fun game that still includes a dungeon, includes a dragon. After all, this is Dungeons and Dragons. This is 50% of that phrase. Then a Shadowline is probably for you. That's it for my number 4 slot. Okay, this is getting tough now, folks, but my number 3 spot is Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Dungeon of the Mad Mage is the latest iteration of the game. It's a WizKids release, and it follows in the same sort of line as Tomb of Annihilation. It's campaign driven, so you want to play it from the first adventure till the last adventure, and I'd recommend playing it in that order so you get a feel for the overall story and the overarching story as it goes along. It is a fantastic game, has some of the best components out of all of these games. I would say the second best, personally because of my bias, but the second best out of all the components. And for new players wanting to get into the D&D Adventure board gaming systems, I recommend this game out of the box. It just plays fantastically well. Artwork is amazing. This time around you are descending into the depths of Undermountain, which lies below the town of Waterdeep, and it's accessible via a tavern and inn known as the Yawning Portal. It's called the Yawning Portal because of this big giant gaping portal in the center of the tavern, where you go down, you descend into it, and you start doing some tasks for the barkeep Durnan, and the story progresses from there. Eventually you come up against the Mad Mage himself, Alistair Blackcloak, and his crazy dungeon. This game plays like the maniacal machinations of a masochistic Mad Mage. Try saying that fast. Try saying that fast. Maniacal machinations of a masochistic Mad Mage. This is Alistair over here. The components and the quality in this game are top notch. You get really good value for your money. You get beholders. I mean, you've got a death tyrant, you've got zombie beholders, not one, but 2 of them. So if you're into painting beholders and looking for components that are great, this game is for you. Here's a Scalada over here. The card stock and quality is also fantastic. These are the dungeon tiles. They look absolutely amazing. That said, there were a few issues with misprints. There's an errata on Board Game Geek that you can go read up. Misprints in terms of the cards and some of the character cards. The game itself, I had to house rule the same way I did with Tomb of Annihilation to ensure that the characters weren't completely overpowered. There is one character in this game that if you probably don't play with him in your campaign, whether you play 2 or 3 players or 4 players, you most likely would not survive. And that character is the human sorcerer Markin. He's got a daily power called Font of Magic, which allows him to play his daily power 3 times, I think it is. And that's extremely useful for taking out huge scores of enemies that prop up on the board. So it's very common to have all 3 of them on the board at any given time, and maybe if Scaladar and maybe even Alistair himself on the board. And without Markin's Font of Magic, you're probably not going to survive that, as I learned very early on in the game. It also makes the game very interesting because your party is then concerned with trying to keep Markin alive because he's a wizard, doesn't have the best stats, but try to keep him alive long enough to take out all of these big bads while you progress and still explore and still adventure and dungeoneer through the game. Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage has fantastic components, is a fantastic game, and a worthy contender at number 3, despite a few niggling issues around the OP story. By the time your characters level up to levels 3 and 4, when you get to level 4, I suggest just ramping it up a little bit in terms of the rules of how many items they can have and how many advancement tokens they can have, so that they don't feel too overpowered. And by the time you eventually do face off against Alistair, that he is more of a threat. And he is quite an imposing threat in this game. He shows up quite a bit at the start of the game, and there's flying swords and there's a bit of Alistair throughout this game. So that's Dungeon of the Mad Mage at number 3. My number 2 is The Legend of Drizzt, the second game in the series. And I'm a huge fan of R.S. Salvatore and his stories of Drizzt and the Underdark and the Companions of the Hall. This game, The Legend of Drizzt, is probably the one game that has seen the most group play in my gaming group, and for that reason it's at my number 2. We've had so much fun playing through this particular game. From all of the adventures, whether it's the standard set of adventures of locate the 8th tile and find Mithril or defeat the dragon Shimmergloom, this game just has a bit of everything, and it includes group challenges as well, such as the Race to Gauntlgrim or the Betrayal adventure. There's a bit of everything in there, including trying to escape the Underdark before the caverns start closing around you. And the cavern tiles are slightly different, so it's not a dungeon crawl as more of a cavern style crawl. So to show you the dungeon tiles like that, so it feels like you're in a mountainous underground area. This is the start tile over here, and it included these cavern edge tiles which kind of add to the whole claustrophobia and impending doom and collapse and dying underneath piles of rubble and stone. Some of the best villains as well, and some of the best heroes ever. We've played through that entire booklet, start to finish. My group's played through it. We've even done custom variations of it, and going up against the big bad Baylor over here. My only gripe, I think, probably is the fact that there's no big villain, whereas in Shadowline you had a Shadowline, you had a Sidorak in Tomb of Annihilation, or you had Alistair in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or Strahd in Ravenloft. This one doesn't have a big bad villain, but it still doesn't deter from the gameplay at all, because there are so many other villains, from Mind Flayers that you have to contend with, to Drows, Driders, the Baylor himself, the Iklogl. There's enough villains in the game, and the game gets quite hard. You get trolls and all sorts of things thrown in at you. It's a great game for group gaming as well as for solo gaming. I'm putting this at number 2 simply because I really enjoy R.S. Salvatore's works, and also because this was the one game that we enjoyed the most playing together as a group. And also, it's a freaking Baylor. It's got to be at somewhere in the top 3. And now for my number 1 game in the D&D Adventure Board Game series. Should be obvious by now, but that is Castle Ravenloft. I received this game way back in 2016 as a birthday gift from my wife. Little did she know what she was quite getting herself into, because this game has probably been like the second mistress in our marriage, because I've been playing it so much and still play it so much. It's such a fantastic game. It's a hard game compared to the other games in the series. I would say it's the hardest of the lot. It can be quite brutal at times, and you probably would die many times over. I've played through the adventures in this game about 6, 7 or 8 times maybe, as well as the campaign with the group once. So soloed the game a few times as well. But it has hands down the best minis that I've seen. It's also kind of nostalgic, and it epitomizes what D&D is for me. It's got that gothic horror vibe going for it. Lots of undead creatures. You've got skeletons, vampires, werewolves, ghouls, and also creatures like wolves and spiders and rat swarms in the game, and some big giant boss villains as well. Some of the best boss villains is the Howling Hag, there's the Golem, there's the Dracolich as well. So it's got really some of the most fantastic minis out of all the games, and that's the artwork for the rule book over there, and this is the adventure book, and the adventures themselves actually play out quite well. It's got the standard adventure, locate a tile, such or escape the tomb, locate a tile, find an icon of Ravenloft, and then it's got some interesting mechanics in how it tweaks those adventures slightly to make for a very different type of game, like Clack's Infernal Artifact. There's the Daylight Assault, where you've got this time-based thing, time track thing, trying to save a villager from transforming into a vampire. There was destroying the Dracolich. There's Adventure Impossible, which is a solo game right in the middle of the book. We play as a single character, but all the different characters, which is unique to the game in that they just tweak the adventures ever so slightly. And I wish that the later versions of this game actually took that type of mechanic into consideration, that it's more around how do we make this adventure a little different, because the later versions of the game are great. They've got great components and a great campaign narrative going for it, but the adventures tend to feel sort of similar. Whereas with Ravenloft, each adventure has its own tweaks to make it a little different. The Howling Hag one was fantastic, where you had to flip the dungeon tiles over and do something different. The Gauntlet of Terror, where you stop monsters from escaping the dungeon to go and terrorize the village. The Rampaging Golem, which you have to pacify. And eventually going off and facing off against Strahd in the crypts. This game is my go-to game for D&D. It has seen the most customization in terms of solo gameplay, as well as building up games from it, combining it with the Shadowline and Drizzt as I went along. Those three fairly compatible together. The later versions, Tomb of Annihilation and Dungeon of the Mad Mage, not at all compatible with those. So I'll still try to figure out how to actually combine those into a bigger campaign, which is what I'm doing now. But that is my review and my ranking for the Dungeons and Dragons Adventure Board Game series, with Ravenloft at number 1. My favorite game in the lot. And look at that Dracolich. I mean, we've had some of the most memorable games playing the D&D Adventure Board Game series. For new people, new players to the game, any one of these are great. If you can get Ravenloft, get Ravenloft. Get Dungeon of the Mad Mage. That's a great game for new players if you're looking for campaign-driven stuff. Get The Legend of Drizzt or Wrath of the Shadowline, or just get them all if you can. And if you get Temple of Elemental Evil, please tell me where you got it so I can get it too. Thanks for joining.